Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have a rather exceptional show for you today. In the first hour, we'll be discussing the news coming from Venezuela, or the latest coming from Venezuela. A little later, we'll get into some rather disastrous job numbers released this morning, extending the losses by 4 million, bringing the total to 30 million people out of work. This grim figure, coincidentally, is released a day before International Workers' Day, where massive strikes are planned to take place all across the United States at major corporations. Towards the end of the first hour, we'll also be discussing the major news involving Trump's National Security Advisor, or former National Security Advisor, M.Flynn. The court released documents showing the FBI's deliberation on whether to entrap Flynn. Yes, that was written down, which is why people could see it the moment it was released. In the second hour, we're going to keep the energy going. We're going to get into some rather significant Supreme Court, or a rather significant Supreme Court ruling involving a large cash sum that the United States government appears to owe health insurance companies around its handling of Obamacare. There's also a new investigation indicating that the number of deaths from COVID-19 are significantly higher than reported. Last but not least, today is Thursday. That means the sexiest named segment on planet Earth. Yes, that's where I'm going, planet Earth. Trends with benefits. We have a great segment for you today. The coronavirus has been taking up significant media space, but we are in the middle of a presidential election. That particular trend, the election season, is bringing out the very worst in Democrats regarding what they're willing to accept from Joe Biden and who they're willing to attack in order to drag Joe Biden over the finish line. You don't want to hear this, but your behavior is massively unproductive if your objective is for Joe Biden to win. But first, let's start here. I came across an article this morning that put me in somewhat of a cross mood. Apparently, nearly 75% of Bernie Sanders supporters, burners, are on Team Joe. You heard that right. Roughly 75% of people who voted for Sanders, who pushed for Sanders, who supported Sanders, are also now backing Joe Biden. The other 25% or so either goes to Trump, either goes to third party, or is just not voting. That number is not high enough. 75%. That means the overwhelming lion's share of people who backed Sanders, who the party basically attacked as being sexist, racist, who Warren attacked as being a foundation of hate, those guys are now going to go to the party that slandered and slammed him in that way, and that they continuously complain, oh, they're not accepting our policies, oh, they're not listening to me, oh, we're being marginalized, oh, they're taking advantage of me. Let me ask you something. Is there anything that the Democratic Party can do where you would walk away and say, yeah, I'm not voting for that. You're not going to get my vote on that particular issue. Is there anything? And if there is not anything, why are you complaining that you're being taken advantage of? Of course you're being taken advantage of. It is incentivized them to take advantage of you in that scenario. Do you know right now, the Joe Biden campaign is in the middle of a dilemma. That dilemma basically boils down to whether or not Joe Biden should bring on somebody for vice president that is an African-American woman or somebody who has some degree of lefty bona fides. Now, why is that his dilemma? The dilemma has to do with whether or not he has the left vote sewn up or whether or not he has a black vote sewn up. And depending on the one that he has sewn up, he will be going to the other one. Meaning, if Joe Biden believes that he is going to get African Americans in sufficient numbers that he doesn't necessarily need to bring a black woman onto the team, then he is going to get a lefty and try to shore up the lefty vote. If he believes that the other is true, he is going to try to shore up the black vote. Understand what I just told you. Depending on the person or depending on the group that Joe Biden believes he already has in the bag, Joe Biden will go to the other group that he does not have in the bag. Why? Because Joe Biden wants to win. And his objective is to essentially move to the area either through just basically identity reasons or in his rhetoric to get that coalition that he's missing. This is kind of my point, right? Basically, if you're willing to vote for pretty much anything, why should they give you anything? You've been able to give over your support for the last 40 years without getting anything in return for that particular support. And that particular trend, that unfortunate trend, continues right now. Are you not tired of ineffectual Democrats? Are you not tired of not being proud of the people who you're voting for, or not being proud of the people you're putting into that office, or only voting for a particular person because of who they are not, as opposed to an affirmative case in regards to who they are? You understand that when you're looking at your political system and you're shaking your head at it, and you're angry at it, you're waving your fist at it, that a lot of it has to do with having no accountability in the political process, especially from the standpoint of the left. It is the left that goes into this notion of dealing with the hard realities of capitalism and trying to ameliorate those concerns within the population. It is the left that deals with this kind of progressive policy, either the expansion of Social Security or ensuring that each and every person is Medicare. What that means is if it's not the left that is attending to that, nobody is. You're not shocked or you're not curious on why economics all of a sudden was taken off the table in regards to debate going back after the New Dealers. You're not weirded out or either interested in why Bill Clinton and Obama, for the most part, threw their body on Wall Street or leaned themselves into corporate interests as opposed to lefty progressive policy. It's not magic. It has everything to do with the incentives built into the system. If you are willing to give your vote over to any random Democrat because you are terrified of Republicans, then you will get a Democrat that will look a lot like a Republican, because basically you've removed accountability from the process. We look at elections oftentimes, especially from the way that people are being told from year to year to year, meaning in 4 years and then another 4 years and another 4 years. My point here is that elections can't be looked at in terms of 4 years. It has to be looked at over the context of time. From year to year to year, as you have one election to the next, if you're only looking at those as narrow items, then you may actually miss the fact that your country is sliding further and further and further to the right. Why? Because there's been nothing in the political process to stop it from doing that. Meaning, because you're so willing to vote for any random Democrat, there's no incentive in the process for Democrats to not just keep going to the right. They're going to keep collecting the money. They're going to keep doing favors of corporate interests. You have dollars and pitchforks, and there are no pitchforks to stop those dollars. Listen to Andrew Cuomo for the moment. Andrew Cuomo is talking about the homeless in New York. Listen to what he's saying here, because this is kind of getting to my point. Are you not sick of ineffectual Democrats? And don't you want to get to the point where you could actually vote for something that you want, the policies that you want? Don't you want to have policies that you could be proud of, that you could push for, that's going to materially benefit the population and drag more people into the polling process? Or maybe you don't. Let's hear Cuomo.
The front page is a picture of a subway car filled with homeless people and their belongings. Respect the essential workers. That is disgusting what is happening on those subway cars. It's disrespectful to the essential workers who need to ride the subway system.
Now, here's the thing. Two things can be true at once. It can be disgusting if people are using the bathroom on the subway, whether those people are homeless or not. By the same token, the issue here is not that they're using the bathroom on the subway. The issue is that they're homeless. If you had somebody who was worth their salt and you had a certain, let's say, accountability, you wouldn't have a particular person come out and say something like that where they're basically attacking the homeless. Again, the issue is that they don't have a home. Yes, it is bad that they're going to bathroom in the subway, but on order of concerns, if you get rid of the fact that they don't have a home, the other issue goes away. I hope you understand what I mean. Aren't you sick of voting for Democrats that will get out there and say something like that? Let's hear Pelosi. Pelosi is in Congress right now. She's in the House of Representatives. She's the leader of the House, Speaker of the House. Let's hear Pelosi and her grand ideas.
Well, let us do it all together. This is a moment of truth for our country about who we are. What is the humanity of America? We wanted to support the small businesses. They are the vitality of our economy, the dreams that people have, the entrepreneurship, the risk they're willing to take for an idea. And so that's why we all gathered and wrote the PPP for that, so that we can try to reach as many people as possible for their jobs and their businesses.
Just so we're clear,
that was not being done
to
in a
Jim
way
Cramer.
that reached the
Jim
underbanked.
Cramer on Mad Money, who does stocks. Jim Cramer basically asked her, hey, how do we deal with this two Americas thing where you have one for the rich and one for the poor? Don't we need to do something else? That was Pelosi's answer. We put in the PPP. Basically, she didn't answer at all. She didn't have an answer. Why didn't she have an answer? This is supposed to be the party that deals with the hard edges of the capitalistic system, right? Well, you have a capitalist asking another capitalist, how are we going to deal with the hard edges of capitalism? And she has no answer. Not just not have an answer, she goes into the PPP where she didn't really get anything out of that deal. She eventually says more testing, as if more testing deals with the hard edges of the capitalistic system. My point is basic. Until you get to the point where you support policy and not just ideologically, rigidly support a party out of fear, as opposed to supporting somebody who you actually have an affirmative case to make for, then you will always get a race to the bottom, and you will get always these ineffectual, worthless politicians that do not deal with or that don't deal with the hard edges of our system. Bob, you have to deal with the fallout from the politicians not dealing with the hard edges of our capitalistic system. What do you have to say about this? Because, I'm not an activist per se. Well, I do the channel, but that's not the same thing as being out there on the streets and going after people. But you do. And you have to attend to these needs, whether it's food, whether it's helping people get resources and whatnot. What do you have to say to these ineffectual Democrats and people who are continuing to vote for these guys?
Well, I think on one end, this party is completely broken because of identity politics. This conversation around pick a black woman or pick a lefty, that all is about identity politics. It's not about ideology. Right. It's not about policy. It's not about complementary. I mean, if it was about picking black women, pick Muriel Bowser of Washington, D.C. I constantly am beating up on London Breed of San Francisco, Keisha Lance Bottoms. If it's about just picking a black woman, you can end up with a black woman that supports neoliberal policies.
That's right.
Condoleezza Rice supported George W. Bush. That you want that black woman? Does that count? And so this shallowness of just picking somebody because they're a black woman for me is so irritating. And ultimately, picking a black woman speaks more to white people, I think, in general, that want to feel like they're woke and they feel cool, and this respectability politics that we can include black people in our decision making. It has nothing to do with the actual ideologies that they're purporting to support. So that's on one end. The other end is the Cuomo stuff is so disgusting to me. I mean, talk about the disrespect we have towards humans to close mental health facilities, the disrespect to get rid of hospital beds, the disrespect of closing shelters. What about all the disrespectful things these billionaires and multimillionaires have done to that city to completely make it a playground for the richest of this world? But where's the disrespect to them? Nobody has a platform to speak out. You're not giving a microphone to these homeless people that are sleeping in these trains and saying, well, what do you think of Andrew Cuomo? And so Cuomo using the bully pulpit just to beat down and berate these people is absolutely disgusting when they're the ones actually making the decisions that have left people in this state. And so I don't give them a pass whatsoever, and it completely makes them incredibly feckless and ineffective, to say the least, Jamar. And I don't know when people break from that, because you are seeing all these people that supported Sanders now going to Joe Biden. And for many people, after 4 years of Donald Trump, you simply said anything is better than this guy and we'll go along with Joe Biden. I just don't think it's going to hold. And we'll talk more later on in the show about Joe Biden's sexual assault allegations and our Trends with Benefits, our weekly Thursday segment. But again, the party without ideology and a party without leaders. Joe Biden is no leader. The guy's falling asleep. So you have no leader and you have no strong policy, and you're stuck with identity politics and shallow policy. I mean, it's shallow politics, tomorrow.
It is. That's exactly what it is. I mean, look, I'm beyond the point of just going with this notion that, okay, this person is not a Republican. Because the problem is that by not having a race to the bottom, or by not having a bar at the door, you end up with a situation where you get worse and worse and worse. You don't have any standards. So it's like, even if it's a situation where the Democratic Party loses, then the party loses. At the very least, you start to create some level of credibility and integrity in the political process where everything doesn't just go. That needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely, Jamar. We'll talk about that and much more over the course of our show today. We're here until 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Give us a call if you want to get in with us, the Political Misfits, on Radio Sputnik, 202-521-1320. In our first hour, we'll be talking about how COVID-19 has been unable to slow U.S. imperialism in Latin America, the latest unemployment numbers, and some revelations on the manufacturing of Russiagate. If that's not enough for you, don't worry, Misfits. We got a second hour after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's
a Tic Tac UFO, man. Just like the one the U.S. Navy caught on video in 2004, but only came clean about it last year.
No, I'm pretty sure it was a bird.
Whatever.
Get nerdy on Wednesdays with Revelations. The Political Misfits look into the world's mysteries and a lot of UFO stuff.
Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, and we're talking about the latest from Venezuela and the continued U.S. efforts to break the back of Maduro and his administration. Here to talk about that and much more is VenezuelaAnalysis.com writer and editor Paul Dobson. Paul, welcome to Political Misfits.
Hi, great to be here, guys.
Paul, it's great to have you on. I wanted to ask you here about some news out of Venezuela this week. Every few months or so, we see stories like this out of Venezuela. So I wanted to know whether or not there was any truth behind it. The common narrative of these stories over the last year, and if not longer, have been about the mismanagement of funds of Venezuela's state-owned oil and natural gas company, that Venezuela would have no choice but to privatize the company. This week, an internal document was circulated amongst Western media showing that a Venezuelan commission set up to study the restructuring of state PDVSA had recommended lifting state control over all its operations and is calling for private, national, and international capital to open up the country's oil business. It was reported that there was a 64-page proposal which recognizes that Venezuela is no longer a strategic player in the oil market, aims to bring oil production to 2 million barrels a day from the current 618,000 barrels a day, quote, in the shortest possible time. And a 180-degree turnaround, Venezuela, in addition to massive privatization in oil and gas production, refineries, and domestic market, would allow the private sector to directly market hydrocarbons and derivatives without state control. Paul, what do you make of this report and the coverage of this idea of privatization by Western media?
Well, without a doubt, Bob, the Venezuelan oil corporation PDVSA is not competitive, as the report allegedly claims. It suffered from a range of internal problems over the last 5 to 10 years, including mismanagement, brain drain, corruption, underinvestment. And when you couple this with a range of external factors, the almost obvious one is the U.S. embargo against the Venezuelan oil industry, the sanctions, the collapse in oil prices both in 2014 and recently now, the chasing off of international investment, credit lines, purchases, the seizing of Citgo in the United States. When you bring all of this together, the picture of the Venezuelan oil industry is not particularly good at the moment. As a result of this, the president of the Republic named a plenipotentiary power commission in February to oversee a restructuring of the industry. We've seen a series of presidents of the oil industry come and go over the last 6 years. Many of them have been charged with increasing production, and they failed to do so. And so we've now definitely seen a shift from the government here in their strategy about trying to recuperate the very key oil industry here, which still makes up at least 95% of the government foreign currency income. So the reality is this. We also have to look at something which is very clear here in Venezuela for anyone based here on the ground, as I am. There is a wave of privatization in Venezuela. As yet, it hasn't been fully extended to the oil industry. It's been limited to other sectors of the economy or the state and public economy. But when we look at these claims made by the international media in this context, it's not entirely implausible to believe that they may actually be true. Obviously, this would be a shock for Venezuela. It would require legal changes to many of the basic founding principles of the Venezuelan oil industry. And it would, in fact, be entirely unpopular by considering the base support of the government and their patriotic instincts here. So I think we have to wait and see what's happening. The context suggests that this may well be the case. However, we obviously can't base any conclusions on hearsay and rumours coming out of the Western mainstream press.
Yeah, you had mentioned there that there is a new oil minister, Tariq al-Assami, in Venezuela. Can you tell us a little bit more about him and the fact that the U.S. is offering a $10 million reward for information that helps locate al-Assami, who's been accused of drug trafficking?
Yes, indeed. Well, Tariq al-Assami is a very well-known public figure here in Venezuela. He is currently and will continue to serve in his role as the economic vice president of the republic. He is a man, I think it would be fair to say, a civilian politician who doesn't necessarily represent either the technical side, which the oil industry requires, or the revolutionary political idealism which encapsulates the Bolivar-Entrevista movement here. He's rather a pragmatic businessman who has, in his role as economic vice president, extended his network of contacts, especially in the Middle East, in other international fields, to bring positive results to Venezuela's international commerce, without a doubt. But anyone who claims that he's some sort of political revolutionary, that he will let's say, take the Venezuelan oil industry on necessarily the same path as the grassroots here in Venezuela, as what they would like to see, is barking up the wrong tree. Tariq definitely represents the business sector of the government, and so it's not unsurprising to see these rumours of privatization have surfaced after his naming. Now, it should also be pointed out that he was put in place as oil minister, replacing a very controversial military man, a general, Manuel Quevedo, who had overseen the oil industry for the last 3 or 4 years and had overseen a demise in the production. So we're seeing a shift away from the military and towards the civilian leadership of the oil industry. And Tariq has also been named as oil minister hand in hand with somebody called Arturo Chavez. Arturo Chavez has been named as president of the oil industry of PDVSA, the corporation itself. Now, what Tariq lacks in, let's say, technical know-how of the oil industry, Arturo Chavez has plenty of this. Arturo Chavez is a chemical engineer by profession. He's worked his way up through all of the levels of the PDVSA hierarchy. He is a former minister himself. He was the president of CITGO in the United States as well. He knows the inner workings of the oil industry extremely well. So in some ways, we can interpret this move to be a double teaming. They've removed the military from the leadership of the oil industry and put in a business politician and put in a technician. And this is the solution which President Maduro hopes will raise the oil output of the country.
You know, I'm curious, and tell me if I'm wrong on this. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this. Is it possible that Venezuela did this in order to kind of ease off some of the political pressure that is being put on them? But it's in some way misunderstanding that the United States doesn't care about privatization in the abstract, meaning, you know, this place is privatizing, so we're going to leave it alone. At this point, it wants the resources themselves. So it's not enough in and of itself for the country just to privatize the oil market. It goes into this notion that we want to get our hands on those resources.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Paul. I think we should go a little bit further indeed, because if these rumours of privatization are certain, we have to ask who would invest in the Venezuelan oil industry at this point. The first option would be Venezuelan expressions of Venezuelan capital, which are very few and far between of that sort of scale. The main investors in any normal situation would be international investors. However, the U.S. embargo on the U.S. oil sanctions basically threaten any international investor who does business with the Venezuelan government with secondary sanctions. We've already seen White House apply secondary sanctions against Rosneft, against the Russian oil giant, earlier this year. So it's very unlikely that any large-scale international firm would be willing to take this risk and buy up sections of the Venezuelan oil industry directly if it were to be put on sale. Obviously, the U.S. firms themselves, Chevron, for example, have been given a wind-up date to the closest operations in Venezuela. Halliburton is in the same boat. But we can't expect U.S. capital to come and purchase the Venezuelan oil industry either. So beyond the claims of privatization, the actual logistics of this, should it be true, are extremely complicated given the very intricate nature of the U.S. oil embargo, which is currently in place.
Yeah, the fact that there is a bounty on some of these people's heads, I would love for any country out there, if you're listening to us abroad, put a bounty on the Sackler family. Are they not drug traffickers of opioids here in the United States? I mean, what an absurd demand that the United States is doing this to Venezuela. And if that's not enough, the brazenness of the U.S. is also shocking, that they're now demanding from the rest of the world to help stop Iran from partnering with Venezuela.
I know.
Basically to provide some humanitarian aid. United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Wednesday called on countries to deny overflight rights to Mahan Air, Iran's largest airline, when Pompeo said recently delivered cargoes of, quote, unknown support to the Venezuelan government. Mahan, if you are following the trend here, is also under U.S. sanctions. Speaking at the State Department news conference, Pompeo said over the last few days, multiple aircrafts belonging to Mahan Air have transferred unknown support to the Maduro regime. This is the same terrorist airline that Iran used to move weapons and fighters around the Middle East. Pompeo went on to say the flights must stop, adding that countries should deny Mahan Air overflight rights, quote, just as many have already denied landing rights to this sanctioned airline. Paul, it's just bizarre to me that the United States, and I understand the history of the United States, but again, is saying to two sovereign countries that they can't work together.
Well, I mean, many have pointed out, and I don't wish to profess to be an expert on this. I think yourselves based in the United States are probably saying it's much better than I. But many have pointed out that these accusations, these ludicrous claims that seem to be taken directly out of a Western flick, come at a time when the Trump administration is under great scrutiny for its handling of the virus. There are elections coming up. There's a very important battleground in Miami where there's a huge amount of Latino voters, mostly right-wing Latino voters, and a whole range of other factors. Also, a number of commentators have pointed out that these sort of actions by the White House are not uncoincidentally looking to take attention away from internal domestic policy and focus on some sort of trumped-up, excuse the pun, foreign threat. But here in Venezuela, the privatization, going back to the main issue which we're talking about here today, guys, the privatization of the oil company is something which would affect us, every Venezuelan, every person living in the country on a day-to-day basis. And it's really not a toy in a game that should be played with between the White House and Caracas. Now, this is something which would really, really affect Venezuelans' quality of life quite significantly and would really derail the project of national liberation which began here in 1999.
I'm curious, what is Venezuelan media like? I mean, for everything that's taken place in regards to the U.S. putting pressure on the country, be it Iran trying to get resources or even Russia trying to assist, how does media interpret the events that take place in Venezuela when they're going on like this with all of this political pressure that's taking place?
Well, as in most countries in the world, also we have our state-run media, which is unanimous in its line supporting the government. We have the private sector media, which is unanimous in its line criticizing the government, some of which include even treads into areas of libel and fake news, basically. We also have a section of community or localized news outlets, we can say, which are generally more in favor of Chavista project here. But there is definitely a vast variety of news outlets here, of editorial lines. There is definitely freedom of expression here in Venezuela. There's a range of debates going on about these rumors, these policies, whether they're positive, negative, and you'll find differences of opinion. So you'll find sectors of the oligarchy saying that this is a great idea. You'll find sectors of the oil-based working class saying this is a terrible idea. So there's a whole plurality of ideas out there. But in general, I think there's a great amount of interest on the oil politics in Venezuela. Venezuelans in general are very aware of what's happening in their oil politics, being the number one industry in the country as it is. And for example, when the Trump administration seized Citgo, there was outcry here. not just from the pro-government sectors, but also from sectors of the opposition, patriotic sectors who said, this is not okay, this is not what we expected. So we're seeing the attacks, the foreign attacks against Venezuela, starting to break down these divisions within the opposition and bring some sectors towards the patriotic bloc, which currently supports the government.
Paul, I'm also curious, with a few minutes left that we have with you, this is Paul Dobson of VenezuelaAnalysis.com. I'm just curious how those in Venezuela are looking at the United States right now, and if people have any thoughts on the presidential race. Do they expect any type of different doctrine or approach from a Biden administration than a Trump administration? Does Maduro gain anything from either of those two people being in office?
Well, generally, there's not much know-how here in Venezuela amongst the population about Joe Biden, about the policies he represents. There was a certain wave of not necessarily support, but let's say interest with regards to Bernie Sanders due to his so-called progressive policies. Joe Biden, for most Venezuelans, would represent the same sort of democratic line as Hillary Clinton, as Barack Obama. And there won't be much interest really about the intricacies of their differences, let's say. Most Venezuelans and the Venezuelan media outlets are very aware of the upcoming elections. I think most people in all of Latin America are. No? The impact of the elections on U.S. foreign policy, we hope, will be significant. And obviously that will further impact the developing of the national struggles for liberation across the continent in the upcoming period. So just as the Venezuelans are extremely aware of what is going to happen in the United States in November, equally the people in Panama and Honduras, in Colombia and Bolivia and a whole range of other countries are also. So like I said, there's still a lot of investigation here in Venezuela to do with regards to Joe Biden, his policies, what he's proposing. And a great deal of interest, without a doubt.
Yeah, and Jamal, this was so frustrating, these different task force that the Biden-Sanders coalition, if you want to call it that, came up with, and not a single one on foreign policy. But yet there are people around the world that were looking at Sanders as some type of change agent that would have an impact on foreign policy. He folds, and he's not necessarily being very vocal on pressuring Biden elsewhere.
Yeah, that's true. And to get to Paul's point, when Obama was in office, Obama came out for a press conference and said, Venezuela is a state sponsor of terror, or they're a natural threat to us or something. And I was like, how? Now, no reporter raised their hand and said, how? So I would imagine Joe Biden would have a similar policy than Obama on this. He's running to be the, second term of Obama or third term of Obama? Paul, is there anything you want to comment before we leave, just to close it out, in case anything we didn't ask you or anything you would like to share?
Yeah, just quickly picking up on your point there, it's worth pointing out to your listeners that the legal groundwork, all of the range, I think there's now over 200 different unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela, the sanctions of a so-called court. The legal groundwork for all of this was initiated by, not by George Bush, not by Donald Trump, but by Barack Obama. In 2015, when he signed the presidential decree declaring Venezuela to be an extraordinary and unusual threat to U.S. foreign policy. So when you're looking at the divide between the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States in regards to Venezuela, in regards to foreign policy, remember this. Remember that as Barack Obama, Democrat, who started the train, which has now led to almost complete embargo, which is causing deaths here in Venezuela. It's costing lives of normal, average Venezuelans who have nothing to do with this political wrangling, this political crisis. This has all started by a Democrat, unfortunately. So, we can't really expect miracles from somebody who comes from the same political establishment as Barack Obama. Obviously, we can expect much worse from somebody who comes from the political establishment associated with Donald Trump and George Bush and his predecessors. But the struggle really has to be now to try to call for a lifting of the blockade, for a lifting of the sanctions.
That's right.
If now's not the moment, it never will be. The sanctions in themselves are criminal, illegal, in times of pandemic, are completely inhumane. And I think it's important for the American citizens to raise their voices against this foreign policy as well.
Yeah, I absolutely completely agree. And it shows right there, Jamal, of why it was so important for the Democrats to keep Bernie Sanders out of their party, the Democratic Socialists, anything to do with socialism. They've worked so hard to destroy it around the world. They can't let it fester here at home. Well, with that, we are out of time. A big thank you to Paul Dobson of Venezuela Analysis.com. Paul, hope we have you back soon. Thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure, guys.
With that, we'll turn to a quick minute break. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for today, I tune to Fault Line with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We've been discussing the Democratic Party's exorbitant fecklessness and Bernie Sanders' complicity in that weakness. We've also had a really interesting conversation in the latest happenings in Venezuela dealing with their oil market and, I guess you could say, potential attempts to privatize the oil market. Give us a call at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. If you have anything to say on this topic or whatever else is on your mind, be sure to keep it PG. Not even PG-13, PG. So as I noted earlier, a rather devastating job report came out early this morning. Before going into the numbers, I feel the need to reiterate that the government and business didn't shut down because they wanted to. They didn't shut down because they were thrilled to do so. They shut down because of the virus, because they were concerned that our healthcare system wouldn't be able to compensate if the numbers got so high that people would end up dying in the streets. Around 3.8 million more people filed for the first time employment benefits last week, bringing the national total to 30 million human beings, roughly 18% of the nation's workforce. Let me repeat that, because this is taking place within the context of, a month and a half. Around 3.8 million more people filed for first-time employment benefits last week, bringing the national total to 30 million people, roughly 18% of the nation's workforce. The problem is made more acute by the failures of the measures that were designed to mitigate the economic carnage to the various families. The Labor Department, based on Labor Department numbers, California paid only 1 in 8 claims in March. Out of roughly 19.5 million workers, 3.3 million Californians have filed for unemployment applications since March 14th. Virginia and Rhode Island have only processed half of their state's claims, with Texas also experiencing difficulties due to the number of people requiring assistance. In one day in Texas, over 2 million people tried to file for unemployment. Now, this problem is compounded because we don't necessarily invest into our unemployment systems, meaning the ability for us to invest in social services. We don't do that. And because we don't do that, when we have a crisis and we actually need to get either resources, money, jobless benefits, these things out, our systems are incapable of dealing. The Paycheck Protection Program, that's the one Nancy Pelosi mentioned above, ran out of funds within days, with many small businesses and their employees still desperate for assistance. Michael Gappin, chief U.S. economist for Barclays, noted programs like the PPP were expected to keep workers on the payrolls. So far, that wasn't the case. They failed in their objectives. Juxtaposed against the difficulties in the job market is May Day, International Workers' Day. Human beings all across the United States at Amazon, Whole Foods, Instacart, and FedEx will be walking out in protest tomorrow. Let's hear the clip of the workers stating their demands and the reason why they're walking out.
Sick leave. That workers can actually utilize close and clean facilities
with COVID positive employees immediately with pay.
Hazard pay.
Hazard pay.
Hazard pay.
Child care subsidies.
Child care subsidies.
Transparency on cases and policy.
From the company at all times.
We want retro pay.
Retro pay
for all unpaid time we used during the pandemic.
Suspend processing all non-essential items through FedEx.
We want reversion back to a transparent pay scale.
Stopping of the exploitation of new shoppers.
These are just some of the things that we are protesting for.
They're not asking for insane demands. They're asking for basic fairness and dignity in the job that they're doing. Especially considering that right now we're in the middle of a pandemic where these guys are frontline workers and we are entirely dependent upon them in order to maintain our supply chains, despite the fact that they're also the people who are some of the most vulnerable in our society and the ones that we, for the most part, basically exploit, or those companies exploit. Let's also be clear that before the COVID-19 virus ever hit, before we even knew what that was, the majority of the population only had $500 in the bank in case of an emergency, and the majority was only living paycheck to paycheck. So this is not a situation where, it just happened overnight. No, our systems were already stretched. Our people in this country were already vulnerable, and the COVID-19 just pushed it that much over a cliff. Bob, I honestly hope, that going forward from this point on, that the workers that are participating in this strike, that all of these guys are interacting with one another to try to expand that movement into something that's this kind of nationwide worker solidarity movement that goes forward from here and doesn't necessarily turn back.
Yeah, I mean, you hope so. And to just speak to your point, 6 in 10 Americans do not have $500 in their savings. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. Tell me where people are affording homes on $7.25 an hour. And a lot of those jobs are in big urban areas. I mean, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, New York City, Washington, D.C. It is crazy expensive to live here. To be able to afford a 2-bedroom market rate, and afford by meaning 1/3 of your salary would go towards rent in Washington, D.C., you'd have to make $133,000 a year to be able to have an affordable rent.
That's why I don't
And
live in
if you
DC.
can't afford rent, or say you pay 75% of your rent, to pay 75% of your salary to rent, what's that leave you with? You have medical bills, you have life insurance maybe you're paying, you have car notes, you have groceries to pay, and who knows, maybe you want to see a movie or a play or have some type of social life. And so you're squeezing people more and more. And we continue to see this across the board. As to your point, Jamal, I think you're completely right. Until there are masses of people that are unified together, nobody's going to switch away. I'm not going to switch to DuckDuckGo as a search engine until millions of Americans leave Google, right? And I think that's the same for you. And you can speak to yourself with the Progressive Soapbox on YouTube. Until others in mass build a movement that you are going to leave, one person leaving at a time is never actually going to have any consequence, because you always can replace one person, but tens of thousands, millions of people that hopefully we'll see strike tomorrow, hopefully that will actually have an impact.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really do. I mean, I would love for people, I know I've said this before, just one thing. Even though that one thing sounds so simple, it's not simple at all, because it's an ideology thing. It's one of those things that is imposed upon the society as they grow up and as they die. The same thing was true for slaves in the way that they saw themselves, or African Americans back in the 50s and the 60s in the way society imposed a certain point of view on them, and workers now. This idea of value. Like, you're valuable, you have intrinsic value just as a person. And yeah, I know, that's not absolute, but as a human being, I think it's perfectly reasonable culturally for us to look at each other with value, meaning we don't let people sleep on the street. We don't have a politician going out there yelling at the homeless because those homeless are homeless. You know what I mean? Like, it's there are ways to go about our affairs where we start and designate certain things as a priority and certain things are important. So yeah, I think each person should have health care. I think that's important. I think each person should have a house. I think that's important. Anything that deals with this notion of human growth and human development, those are things that we should cater towards as a society. Profit, it's not it.
Yeah, and we have a society that is focused on profit, and this is where the false notion of compassionate capitalism, for whatever that means to people, these people that say that, I don't think have ever really dealt with corporations or developers. I mean, the whole idea of the corporation is it's no longer human, despite what obviously many people on the right would say that corporations are human. These things aren't human. They don't care about dignity or humanity. They're there to make profit, and when you've unleashed these systems within a democracy that's been completely captured by these corporations, there is nothing for them to do but make profit. There is no compassion to be pulled from them. It's not like, oh, they could be more compassionate if we just give them a stern talking to, Jamal. They're literally designed in a way to only make profit. Their fiduciary responsibility is to the stakeholders to make profit. The stakeholder does not say, well, how compassionate were you? How many people did you care for? They simply look at numbers, and that's the benchmark. So where does the compassion come from?
Well, and by the way, if you gave people a raise, your stock will go down. Have you noticed that? Like when there's a situation where there's like, okay, we're going to increase the wages by these workers, oftentimes the stock will go down. They will get punished by the market for effectively giving their workers raises. Why? Because basically the workers, one of the biggest expense in the sense of a corporation are the workers. And if you're going to increase their wages, well, that's going to cut down on your bottom line. Now, the bottom line shouldn't be the end all be all, but in our system it is. And so they look at it as we need to press and put pressure on labor. It's the reason why they export jobs. It's the reason why they try to cut jobs and put in computers or technology. It's expensive. And so, you know, in a situation where human beings actually need to live, well, you have this contradiction between the human being that needs to live and the corporation that wants to make as much money as possible. I mean, that's why you have unions, right?
Yeah, and there's a whole idea that there's like some compromise to be had with these. I mean, they're asking these in the strikes on Friday. They're asking for like $2 hazard pay increases. They're asking for basic protective gear. They're asking for sick leave without having to take a COVID-19 test. As if people aren't stressed out. Is that not enough reason to take a few days off of work? Is because people are losing their hair and not getting COVID-19. But unless you have the virus tomorrow, you can't take off. There is no meeting these corporations halfway. And so it'll be really interesting to see the outcome of these strikes. So hopefully people join them tomorrow, Friday, on May Day. Jamal, with that, let's take a quick break before coming to talk about one of my least favorite topics, but we are going to talk about it. It's the manufacturing of Russiagate and the politics behind the arrest of M.Flynn and Roger Stone. I know nobody's paying attention, but pay attention because we've been screaming this on Radio Sputnik for 4 years that you were full of it if you thought there was anything to this Russiagate nonsense. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. I'm going to be angry after the break, Jamal, so get ready. We're live in D.C.
Do you think, Bob? Do you think?
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamal Thomas. I took a quick breath and a drink of water. I've slightly calmed down, Jamal. I'm going to try to get through this next story before I lose it. But guess what? The more we learn about Russiagate, the more it seems like it's a big, sleazy, politically motivated pile of nothing burger. All of us with brains have been trying to say this, but America's seemingly brainless at this point. But here we go. Here's some more news showing that there was nothing here from the get. Last night, FBI records of the Bureau's interviews with General Michael Flynn while he was Trump's national security advisor show the Bureau going into an interview with Flynn was still trying to figure out what their goal was of the interview. FBI notes from the day they interviewed General Flynn show questions like, quote, what is our goal? Truth, admission, or get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired? Fox News and CNN claim the notes were written by the FBI's former head of counterintelligence, Bill Priestap, after a meeting with Comey and his deputy director, Andrew McCabe. Priestap doesn't seem to have confirmed this. The notes also muse as to whether the FBI should get Flynn to, quote, admit to breaking the Logan Act and then let the DOJ decide what to do. The Logan Act is a law from 1799 that makes it a crime for citizens to intervene in disputes or controversies between the United States and foreign governments, that it should be used to categorize as criminal the interactions between an advisor to an incoming president and foreign representative has been derided by a lot of legal scholars as abusive. Another unsealed document is in an email from FBI agent Lisa Page to the FBI General Counsel's office and to Agent Peter Strzok about the law against making false statements to law enforcement officers, the one they eventually got Flynn to plead guilty to. They referred to it as 1001. In one note, Lisa Page wrote, quote, I have a question for you. Could the admission regarding 1001 be given at the beginning of said interview, or does it have to come following a statement which agents believe to be false? Does the policy speak to that? She goes on to write, I feel bad that I don't know that, but I don't remember ever having to do this. Plus, I've only changed it once in the context of lying to a federal probation officer. Page noted that it could be given at the beginning of the discussion with Flynn, quote, then it would be an easy way to just casually slip it in as, of course, as you know, sir, federal law makes it a crime too. The official responded that he was 90% sure you can just say it at any time. Flynn's team said he was never warned of the penalties for making false statements. What is never mentioned now, Jamarl, in these reports about Flynn's meeting with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. is that none of it ever had anything to do with meddling in U.S. elections or Moscow influencing the U.S.
That's right.
Instead, when Trump's team became aware of the Obama administration was going to abstain on a UN vote condemning illegal Israeli settlements, the pro-Israel Trump asked Flynn to reach out to Russia and other governments to suggest they delay it or try to defeat the resolution. And why? Because Israel had asked them to. Israel has been clear about this, saying, quote, of course we reached out for help on the vote. By ignoring this, Jamarl, the press can continue to pretend that Flynn, Trump, and the whole team were coordinating with their puppet masters in Moscow about undermining American democracy. But rather, it was absolutely business as usual, just the U.S. again covering for its blatantly illegal apartheid ally in the Middle East. Let's not forget that. Jamarl, for me, it's always been about how much Israel has influenced Donald Trump. I mean, they had multiple Donald Trump campaign offices in that country. And here we go again, the whole thing basically a setup by the FBI. Not sure exactly what they were doing from the get, talking to him, trying to figure out how they could basically set up Flynn to lie so they could get him fired. All over nothing to do with Russia, but having to do with Israel.
Well, see, I was more cynical about this. My thought was, is it plausible, or is it even possible, meaning potentially so, that a president who was in the Democratic Party, who put on a attorney general that he appointed, would that person have an interest in stopping Trump from getting in office? Meaning, with the people who are working in the FBI, if those people were politically motivated, would those people have an interest in, around the edges, stopping Trump from getting in office however they could, or punishing him when he does? Now, the case for Flynn, nobody wants to bring up Israel. No one wants to bring up the notion of Israel influencing our politics. So instead, it's far easier to scream Russia and then point to Russia. But the reality of it is very possible that a Democratic president with a Democratic attorney general that said she wouldn't instigate herself into the case. Well, we know that's not true because we have a situation where Comey comes back and says so. Comey says, well, she tried to push me to talk about the case as a criminal matter, basically talking about it in Hillary Clinton's language. Well, how far did that go? And beyond how far that went, you even have the situation where Peter Strzok and McCabe, all of these guys were working on Clinton's case at one point Clinton gets off, Strzok in particular writes or updates the language that was written, changing something that was illegal to something that basically wasn't. And these people who basically got Clinton off ends up getting on Trump's case. Now, McCabe and Strzok, or at the very least Strzok and his paramour, Lisa Page, has mentioned before that he hates Trump's guts. And so, is it shocking to me that somebody who's working with Trump, that these guys might be trying to find a way to stick it to him? Not in the least. Not in the least.
No, absolutely, Jamal. And we have never heard of our PAC. It's APAC, right? The American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. Can you imagine if there was an American Russia Public Affairs Committee? The outrage that would be there. And if that wasn't enough coming out of the General Flynn story there, Jamal, we also had more news from the Roger Stone arrest and some of the conversations there. Documents released, I think yesterday, the day before, also revealed some communication that actually did happen between Roger Stone, an advisor to the Trump campaign, and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. But Jamal, hold on to your seat now. It's pretty mind-blowing, these smoking guns. These Twitter messages include such thing as Stone blustering to Assange, quote, "I'll bring down the entire house of cards," and saying, "I don't know of any crime you need to be pardoned for." Stone also called the investigation nonsense and told the publisher, quote, "As a journalist, it doesn't matter where you get information, only that it is accurate and authentic." Assange then correctly, it turns out, expressed trepidation at the U.S. government's moves against him, saying, quote, "Between CIA and the Department of Justice, they're doing quite a lot." On the DOJ side, that's coming most strongly from those obsessed with taking down Trump, trying to squeeze us into a deal. And Stone reassured him that he was trying to advocate for him. I'm not a lawyer here, Jamal, so maybe someone else can tell me what is nefarious and criminal in these exchanges.
It doesn't sound like anything is nefarious and criminal in these exchanges. But that's the catch, right? When Roger Stone, they understood that Roger Stone was full of bluster. Roger Stone basically lied, and Roger Stone is now in prison for lying. But again, this goes to the whole punitive thing, right? I mean, they descended Roger Stone's house like a compound. Now, whatever you want to think of Stone, don't particularly care. I don't necessarily think our government or our cops should be used in this kind of punitive way to go after people who we don't particularly like. And that's basically what it seems to be in the case of Flynn, and it seems to be in the case of Stone, in the way not just prosecuted him, but the way that they apprehended him. I mean, like, they didn't do that to the CIA officials that was lying. Clapper and the other gentleman, they didn't do that to them at all. And yet for Flynn,
and Brennan, obviously, the more we find out about Brennan, the more we realize that he was behind a lot of the stuff that led down this path. And Jamal, the reason I was getting so angry there before the break, I mean, I've worked at Radio Sputnik now for maybe 4 years. Shout out, thank you, Radio Sputnik, for the gainful employment. But it got to a point there where I started leaving my computer at home because I thought the FBI was going to raid our offices any day, even though I knew I wasn't doing anything of any sorts that would deserve it. But they had such a push and an aggression, a PR campaign, that every major outlet pushing these narratives. And it shows how powerful and strong the intelligence community is in controlling our media, because now we're finding out none of this stuff is real, but they had the whole entire nation basically riled up talking about this for some amount of time, Jamal, and they had scared the bejesus out of a lot of us that were doing really good journalism. And so we continue to fight through it. We continue to push through it. But at the same time, it's very overwhelming to feel like the whole weight of the world's on you, coming at you. And now we find out more and more about all of the lies that were taking place.
See, I assumed they were lying. Now, the reason why I assumed they were lying, though, it's not that I didn't think it was possible, but they were basically making the argument that Facebook and Twitter ads was responsible for a woman who spent over $1 billion losing that race. Now, I'm going to look at them and I think you're insane. Now, the Democratic Party has every incentive in the world to lie to cover the fact they failed. The media loves the fact that they have this kind of Tom Clancy-esque palace intrigue. And of course, we have intelligence. So I agree with you, Bob.
Yeah, I was with you with the lies, but again, even when you know they're lying and you're in the middle of it, it just feels it's aggravating, to say the least. Jamal, let's take a quick break here. We're at the end of our first hour. Don't worry, we have another hour of news, politics, and culture right after this break. In our second hour, we'll look at the profits drug companies will look to make as the world scrambles for a cure to COVID-19, what it's like to run as a Green Party candidate. And in our weekly segment, Trends with Benefits, we'll look at a story that we've been covering for weeks now, but is just trending in U.S. news. That is sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden. And if that is not enough, we'll have much more for you. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, kind of sort of with you, Jamarl Thomas. We continue to broadcast from our homes. Big shout out to our engineers for going into the studio so we could be live with you daily from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 105.5 FM in the nation's capital. You can also check us out in the evenings if you don't have a chance to listen to us live during the day on any podcast platform. Just search Political Misfits and you'll find us there. And if you also want to see Jamarl's beautiful face, you can still do that. You can head over to the Progressive Soapbox channel on YouTube. You can see him and occasionally a photo or two of me. We'll be back in the studio as soon as possible so we can both be with all of you live, which is our favorite thing to do. Give us a call, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. We got lots to cover in the next hour, including the government's efforts to undermine your health care and the media's turn on Tara Reade, 202-521-1320. We do start our second hour here talking about the state of healthcare in America, and more specifically, how we are somehow seeing the opposite thing happen as many of us had hoped would happen. Let me explain this. I know for the last 5 years or so, I bought into the line that once rich folks or folks who were for private healthcare had to face a global pandemic, then of course, they would finally realize that we need a universal public healthcare system in the U.S. How could it be possible that people would deny healthcare to those without it when that person not having healthcare would mean that they would have a greater chance of getting sick? Sure, it's one thing to deny healthcare to someone that has no impact on our lives, but now in a pandemic where we are seeing how truly interconnected our world is and how interconnected health is between all global citizens. And yet, despite this, we continue to see leadership in both major U.S. parties firmly stand against universal public healthcare. Here to talk about this and much more is Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance and a member of the steering committee of HOPE, Health Over Profit, an organization working to achieve national improved Medicare for all health systems. Dr. Flowers, thank you so much for being back with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You know, Dr. Flowers, I know I was fooled. I thought if there was ever a time for there to be a national movement towards universal health care within our political sphere, it would be now. Yet we are seeing the government continue to turn to private companies. We are seeing private companies crack down on doctors and nurses, and we're seeing a huge lack of resource allocation to serve and meet the needs of the least amongst us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this reminds me of the time back in 2009, 2010, when they were, there was, again, a huge cry out that we had almost 50 million people without health insurance. People were demanding health care, and the Obama administration gave us the so-called Affordable Care Act. And it was then, as I was pushing in Congress, that I really saw up close how corrupt this whole thing is. But even since then, our system has deteriorated to an even greater extent, as now they're just completely blatant about the fact that they don't actually care about our lives. The healthcare system is primarily organized for profit, and that comes at the expense of our health and our lives.
Yeah, and Jamarl, here we are again, the economy collapsing around us, millions of folks unemployed, and yet corporations are making and will continue to make insane profits. This most starkly yesterday as the Dow Jones jumped after researchers released news that the experimental drug remdesivir, I'm not sure if I said that right, remdesivir might help patients recover more quickly from the infection. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has not yet approved any drugs for the treatment of the coronavirus, but it plans to announce an emergency use authorization for the drug, according to the New York Times. The authorization could come as soon as this week. In a statement to CNN, the FDA said it is in talks with Gilead Sciences, the maker of remdesivir, about making the drug available to patients. Wait, I'm sorry. The U.S. government is, quote, in talks with a $60 billion drug company who made $5 billion in 2019 about how much we can pay them for the drug. Why are we negotiating profits, Jamarl? Where is the executive order saying we're taking over the production of the drug and offering it at most the cost to the American people and, for that matter, the world?
If you want to know where your country caters to, Like, if you want to know what direction your country caters to, it's this, right? I mean, basically, you have a situation where you have millions of people in the United States that are infected, 63,000 at this point dead. You have a large sum of people, 30 million at this point, no longer have a job. 10, 12 million no longer have health care. And instead of the Trump administration saying, yeah, you're going to make this drug and we're going to give you a decent price for the drug and we're going to get this out as fast as possible. Profit is not necessarily on the table in regards to the highest priority. But that's not where we are. I mean, unfortunately, Margaret, when Obama was in office and he pushed the Affordable Care Act, I remember the public option was something that Obama initially was talking about, but eventually took that off the table. And now we're back basically with the Affordable Care Act that Republicans have been ripping apart, ripping the arms off. How would this have been different under, let's say, a Medicare for All system? Meaning if COVID-19 hit, let's say it struck in the same way, same month and everything else, but the only difference was that there was Medicare for All in place as opposed to Obamacare in place. What would have been the main differences between our experiences between now versus in that reality?
Oh, that's a great question. But quickly, if I could comment on the remdesivir, the initial study, which was just a few patients, the only thing they found so far is in those patients, it seemed to shorten the course of disease by a few days. What we're really looking for is something here that's going to prevent the deaths that we're having from COVID-19. So before we get too excited about this very expensive drug, we ought to wait and see what, more research definitely needs to be done on this situation. And looking at what happened with the hydroxychloroquine, we really need to be careful before we start, getting too excited about these things. But under a National Improved Medicare for All, things would have been very different. First off, we wouldn't have seen the closures, the growing closures of hospitals in our rural and our urban areas across the country that are closing because they can't make enough money. They can't bring in enough profits to keep their doors open. And under National Improved Medicare for All, every hospital would just get a monthly check from the government to operate. They wouldn't have to worry about how many patients they're seeing. They could just focus on taking care of their population and not having to come up with schemes or get bought out by venture capitalists to try to make money off of them. We would also see a system where every single person would have health care, health insurance and national health insurance, and would be able to access that care without having to pay upfront co-pays and deductibles and those kinds of things that keep people from seeking care. And also they wouldn't have to worry about getting big bills. There would be no bills. So you would just, if you needed care, you don't have to worry about that. Could you pay for your food, or is that going to mean you can't pay for rent? Are you going to be bankrupt because you sought care? You would just get care. And then another really big piece of it is that under National Improved Medicare for All, we would do bulk purchasing. So the government would be buying the medications, buying the medical supplies, and then providing those to the various states based on what they need at a much lower cost than what they pay. Right now, we see states fighting with each other, and the corporations that are making these drugs and supplies are having a heyday because they're just creating this bidding war, driving up the prices and forcing the states to try to outbid each other.
Give us a call, 202-521-1320. What's been your experience with the healthcare system? And if you have any stories around COVID-19, 202-521-1320. Dr. Flowers, I wanted to ask you a little bit more here about Bernie Sanders, the person in the political sphere most associated with a public health care option. When he dropped out of the presidential race and instead of demanding Joe Biden there, adopted a universal public health care option and said he endorses Joe Biden and immediately gets task forces, I wasn't really quite sure. Why not pressure Biden on something that's incredibly favorable, incredibly popular amongst a lot of people in this country? And why not move towards the Green Party or towards another party? But instead, he goes back towards the centrist, towards the Democratic Party. I'm curious what you thought of that move.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, we saw the same kind of thing happen back in 2016. I mean, not only when he endorsed immediately Hillary Clinton when he lost the primary, but also as soon as the election was over, his message to the single payer movement was, oh, yeah, I know I just ran on National Improved Medicare for All, but I'm not going to be introducing legislation, single payer legislation. It actually took pressure. We put pressure on him. We wanted him to introduce a bill that would be similar to the one in the House that we had been organizing around for a long time, what we saw as a really great bill, and he refused to do that companion bill. And, he was saying we have to protect Democratic Party unity, meaning that really within the Democratic Party, most of the members of Congress don't support national improved Medicare for all. Some of them pay lip service to it, because they think it pleases their base, but they aren't really there. And so what this really underscores is that, we're not going to elect our way out of this situation. It's really about building a mass movement that demands this, that's going to pressure whomever is in office to do this. And I think that's why I'm excited about the launch of the general strike campaign on May Day tomorrow, because I think this is one of the major demands, and this is a nationwide effort led by workers and people who are impacted. That's what it's going to take to win national improved Medicare for all.
And speaking of that tomorrow, I guess it's kind of leaning into maybe a possible answer. Where do you see some of those movements taking off? I've always said, and I think obviously other people have said it too, but the place that movements in America go to die are in the political sphere, the electoral sphere basically kills any movement. So you're talking about a large economic labor strike tomorrow. Is that where we need to turn if we are going to actually have political movement?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't address your question about the Green Party. The Green Party actually approached Senator Sanders about, joining that ticket. And even before he ran, we had approached him about running as an independent, but he refused to do that because he is a Democrat. So people just need to take that, in mind when they put their hopes in Senator Sanders to be breaking from the Democratic Party. But the Democratic Party is considered to be the place where social movements go to die. And that's why it's so important that the movement be independent. When I was pushing for single payer back in 2009, 2010 during the Affordable Care process, the lessons I took away from that is that it's so critical that we be independent of political party when we're pushing on these politicians, because as soon as you align with a party, you lose your power. You already have said, well, even if you don't do this, I'm still with you. I'm part of your party. You also need to be really clear about what you want. The public option was something that was sold as a solution. It's not a solution. It wouldn't have solved the fundamental problems with our healthcare system. And so we need to be clear about what a single payer system would look like. And then the third piece is you have to be uncompromising, because they're constantly going to tell you that you're asking for too much. That's been the situation throughout time. And so we have to say, no, we're asking for what we need, and we can't accept anything less than what we need. That you can't compromise when it's a situation of life or death.
Yeah, and Jamal, that's what drives me so nuts is this idea of there's this compromise that people think is going to happen, is if there's like a task force and we're going to compromise. There is no compromising on racism, on sexism, on classism. There is no compromise to be had, but yet people always kind of assume Democrats and Republicans are going to compromise, or that Bernie Sanders is somehow going to get Biden to compromise on these things. Either the compromise just never happens, and as Dr. Flowers is saying, the Democrats just kill the social movement that was looking to compromise with them, or the compromise ends up just breaking the system further, such as the Affordable Care Act. So, of course, and surely the Biden camp's not going to meet Sanders or the public health care movement anywhere in the middle. They're just going to look to kill it and silence it.
Yeah, there's some things you compromise on. There are other things you just have to win. And, you need to know which is which. Like you say, you can't necessarily compromise on this notion of racism per se. But I would even argue from the standpoint of workers, you shouldn't compromise on you having what you need in order to get from point A to point B. If a private enterprise can't afford to basically pay you a decent wage, then that business might not need to be open. We need to start looking at it in those terms. That's why I appreciate what you're saying, Flowers. A question for you. So what should people do then? What would be your advice for people who say, you know what, I agree with her. These are the policies that I want, and I don't want to settle for anything else. Where should those people go right now in the political space now that Sanders, as you call him, a Democrat, that's what he's looking like at this point, so fair enough, now that he is flamed out?
Well, I think, like we've seen around the world, you see it with the Yellow Vest movement in France. That's been a sustained protest going on now for almost a year and a half of weekly protests. This is what we have to build for in the United States. It's from building pressure, building economic pressure by withdrawing our support through strikes and boycotts, that we can actually have an impact on the system and force it to change, and showing that we are not going to stop until we get what we're asking for. And what we're asking for is, it's things that you have in other countries. It's things that we could afford to provide: good wages, living wages, housing as a human right, free public education, health care for everyone, worker protections, pensions. These are all things that exist in other countries, and the countries are better off because of it, because their population has what they need to be healthy and productive. So I'm excited about this May Day campaign because it's a general strike campaign. It starts on May Day, but it's going to be every month. It's building as we go over and go through time. More organizations, more workers are going to be joining it. We just did a major call on it last night at popularresistance.org. People can find that on our YouTube channel. And we're sending out, and we'll be posting later today, instructions on how people can get involved. But basically, it's refusing to pay your rent and putting pressure on our legislators to do a rent moratorium until after the pandemic is over. It's workers not working. It's people not buying things on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday this weekend. It's people who are in debt, like student debt. They're joining together to do a debt strike. And people can plug in by following the various hashtags on social media: General Strike 2020, May Day 2020, People Strike, and by talking to people in their community, organizing. Talk to your neighbors about what's going on, about how the system is not going to change unless we force it to change, and start building in your own community through, raising awareness. You can hold signs, you can put signs on your house, you can send emails or post on social media. Also building networks of mutual aid so that we can support each other through these crises that we're facing. And then ultimately building systems in our communities where people have input over what's being done, where it's participatory and cooperative. That's the direction we need to go to solve the problems in this country. And when we lead, the political leaders will follow us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you get to something when you're saying the importance of talking to your neighbor. I was really just always shocked by how many people I talked to when I was in Iowa for the primaries there, and how many people said, yeah, I would love free healthcare. I would love my college debt to be forgiven. But constantly people always said, well, we can't afford that. And so there's been this conditioning of the American people to believe all of these things that are good for them, and all of these things that other places in the world have tested and shown to work. We can't have those things here. So you're up against a huge PR machine. How do you think we break through some of that and get some this new message out to people that's telling the truth?
It has been broken because of the financial collapse that's occurred this year, and seeing the government making these massive pieces of legislation and the Federal Reserve just giving out hundreds of billions of dollars. And again, just like we saw after 2008, they're going to the wealthy, to the big industries, to the people that don't actually need it. And while many of us are still struggling, not getting, this $1,200 check is nothing really, a one-time check. If you look at Canada, they're giving $2,000 a month to every adult through the pandemic. So part of that is being dispelled by saying that the government can actually create money when it needs to. Another piece is the awareness that, the massive increase in military spending that we've seen over recent years is not helping us. It's not making us safer. In fact, it's actually making us less safe, as we are creating so many enemies around the world and, destabilizing areas and showing other countries that we don't actually care about their human life. And so, there is a growing call for cutting the Pentagon budget and using those funds for programs that are actually supporting life, rebuilding our infrastructure, transitioning our energy system, building transportation, public transportation that's free or affordable. These are the things that we need to be doing, and we can do them. They won't happen on their own. They will only happen when we raise that demand for them.
Jamarla, I'm curious, what do we do with the folks out there that still don't accept the fact that this government in the United States is just not working for the people? There's been plenty of people I've talked to here in Washington, D.C. over the last month that said, no, the mayor's doing a great job. She's doing everything she can. It's a lot better than in a lot of places. And you're just saying, go talk to the small businesses. Go talk to the hundreds of thousands of people that live below the poverty line. This city has the highest per capita homeless rate and incarceration rates in the country, the largest health disparities between blacks and whites, and yet you still go to people and they're like, no, everything seems cool to me. How do you I guess it's just how do you shake people out of this? But also, what do you do with these people? Do you just organize around them, or do you have to fight them and go directly at them?
No, you have to organize around them. I would argue organize around them. Basically, look, it's hard to get people to deviate from a position that they've accepted. And if their Maddow listeners or Fox News listeners, well, they might be ensconced in a certain point of view of the world. And they may trust certain people who give them that point of view, who basically tell them government is awesome. Or at the very least, their party within that government is awesome. So it's hard to kind of peel those people away. I mean, when you think about your own political disposition, or I'll think about mine. I mean, I didn't come to this kind of odd political disposition until I got older. And I started looking over history, and then there was an incongruity between what I understood history and my understanding of government to be versus how it acted in practice. And it was like that incongruity was the thing that kind of woke me up to some degree. Like it's I don't know if you can just make an argument and drag people to your position. I think it's one of those things just that has to be done over and over. Think of how mainstream media does it. They repeat a story 1 billion times. And eventually people will be like, okay, well, yeah, man, that's probably right. Well, they don't know. They've just been told so often that they started to accept it as true. And so I think you organize around them. Am I right, Margaret? I mean, basically, you can't necessarily get people to believe something that they fervently don't want to believe. And so it's like you almost have to bring them to your position, not necessarily try to browbeat them.
So, education is the foundation of any social movement. People have to be aware that there's a problem before they're going to organize and mobilize around solving that problem. So the way I approach this, and I've seen over the years, is that we're planting seeds. We're letting people know, oh, hey, just as you said, no, there's a lot of poverty here. There's a lot of incarceration. You're not seeing it, but it exists. And here's, where it exists, and showing that information. Over time, as people, start to see it elsewhere, it starts to finally gel in their mind that, oh, that actually is a problem. That actually is happening. But you're just planting the seed there. You can't force it to grow. You can plant it there and you can nourish it. And over time it may grow. But in reality, we don't need every person to have a victory. The numbers show, if you look at nonviolent movements, that it's actually a small part of the population mobilized that makes a difference. What you need from the larger part of the population is support for the ideas that you have. So looking at National Improved Medicare for All, we've been growing support for that over the decades. We have majority of people who believe that that's what we need to do. Now, if we can mobilize a small portion of that majority, we can actually win this.
Dr. Flowers, I want to circle back a little bit to the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court ruling on healthcare that happened earlier this week. The federal government has been captured by corporations and special interests, to say the least, telling us a little bit more about the Monday Supreme Court ruling that the Congress had cheated health insurance companies by reneging on a $12 billion promise made under the Affordable Care Act. Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote the 8-1 opinion on the basis of a principle as old as the nation itself. The government should honor its obligations. Basically, a bunch of private insurance companies took major losses through the Affordable Care Act, and now the Congress is reimbursing them for $12 billion. Congress tried not to pay, and the Supreme Court's ruling that the U.S. government must pay. Associate Justice Samuel Alito dissented, the lone dissenter, calling it, quote, a massive bailout for insurance companies that took a calculated risk and lost. Obviously, the U.S. government, in my opinion, should honor agreements and should pay those who have contracts for service. But why did Obamacare lead to massive payouts to private insurance companies?
That's one of the biggest problems with the Obamacare. The good part of it was, expanding Medicaid in many states, giving access to care for people who have low incomes. But the bulk of the bill was really about holding up our dysfunctional private insurance system. So this is, think about this. The solution to getting people health care in the government's mind under this law was, we're going to mandate that people purchase private health insurance. We're going to set up markets in the various states, and we're going to hire people to sell that insurance for the private insurance companies in the hope that the insurance companies will actually pay for care. And because the insurance companies don't like to pay for care, that goes against their profit model, we're going to say, well, if you'll come into this market and sell your insurance to people, then we'll actually, provide funds to subsidize your cost if you actually end up having to pay for care. So it just shows how ludicrous this whole system is. Why do we have private insurance anyway? I mean, it's a financial tool to make profit for investors. It has really nothing to do with paying for our health care. It's why we need a National Improved Medicare for All, because under that system, It's just the money is there, people get care, and the government pays for it. There's no middle entity that's trying to block care or suck profits out of the system. So under this law, yes, the government said we would pay you. They should, but the whole thing was really flawed from the beginning.
Yeah, and Jamal, this is so frustrating to me as always, because we get these lawmakers and people working on the Hill with vested interest in breaking the government and breaking it through the stealing, erosion, and rotting of the system. So they get into the system, they find perfectly good public programs and public goods and do everything they can to destroy them. I'm thinking specifically of two really popular programs. One, the U.S. National Park System. We have these tremendous parks. They promote health and well-being. They promote conservationism. And what do? We sell off lands to oil and natural gas companies. And second, which is getting a lot of attention lately, is the U.S. Post Office. One of, if not the most beloved government agencies, the Post Office, could be out of business in 3 months, not because the agency is broken or not profitable, but instead there are people within the system that tinkered with the rules to demand the agency meet certain criteria, unlike any other agencies.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, this is one of those things where you get into this kind of ideological combat, and the reason and the problems with voting for any blue and believing that any blue would do. These institutions, these programs, the Republican Party, when they're in office, they know exactly what they want to do. We want to attack unions because unions are the things that back the Democratic Party. We want to attack voting rights. We want to attack anything that would hurt us from getting in office. They understand that a large amount of the population don't believe in their ideas, so they go for very specific interests, meaning religious or plutocrats, or another group of people. Let's call them, Hillary would call them deplorables. But you get my point. Basically, they go after these things in government that make life easier and better for various people. If they got the opportunity to go after Social Security, they would do it. Same thing with Medicare, they would do it. Same thing with Obamacare, they would do it. And it doesn't necessarily matter if the public is against them on it. They have a very specific political interest to represent the interests of the 1%. And what that means is every penny that we can squeeze out of the public coffers, we're going to squeeze it, expropriate it to the top. And unfortunately, until people realize that, because I don't think people entirely get that. Am I wrong on that? And, you know, Margaret, am I wrong on that? The people who you engage with and talk to, let's say the people who are not activists, who are not entirely into the political space, when you're engaging with them, do they understand that? Like, do they get that you have certain factions of the government that just don't believe in government at all? I mean, Democrats believe it in a modicum, but Republicans, for the most part, are trying to cut it to the bone. And look, to be honest, Democrats are too. They were passing the tax cuts for Obama. Hillary Clinton, if she would have gotten in office, she would have passed the tax cut herself. But do they realize that there is an aspect of government that is entirely against the interests of the public as a whole? Meaning all these government services, all of these things that they provide that makes their lives easier? Or do they just kind of look at it as, okay, these guys are just fighting for, both of them are just fighting for their own ideological belief system?
You know, I think that whole fight of Republican versus Democrat is something that has been so distracting to our population, because in the end, and the studies show this, both the Republicans and Democrats are, serving the wealthy interests and not the people. They just go about it in different ways. Within a narrow spectrum, there's some differences. The Republicans believe in a smaller government. The Democrats say they believe in a social safety net, but they don't actually act on that. I remember fighting the Obama administration for years over their attempts to privatize and cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And I think that most people understand that money is the problem, that our government serves the interests of the wealthy. And we have to use these opportunities to help people to understand. There's been around the country for a long time efforts to privatize water, and that has really mobilized communities when they understand that if the water gets privatized, they may not be able to afford it. They may have their water shut off. Which is an outrageous thing to do to a household. And the Postal Service, this is a situation where there is a fundamental belief in selling it off to privatize it, even though 91% of the population supports the Postal Service across the political spectrum. So I think what we have to do is try to get away from this distraction and really look at what the fundamental issue is, and that's privatization and looting. Basically, of anything that we have, these private corporations are going to use opportunities to make a profit from them.
No,
I think we're... Go ahead, Jamal.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with that, but I do think they go after it in different ways. I mean, it would be weird for a Democrat to try to get rid of Medicare in its entirety. it would be weird for a Democrat to get rid of Social Security in its entirety. They just have different ways of going about it. I agree with you, but I do think there are caveats in what they go after, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I was very active in 2009, 2010, 2011, the whole attempts by the Obama administration to basically blame our budget problems on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, even though they had nothing to do with that. They have separate funding. And so they created these fiscal commissions, and they gave them different names, and they were bipartisan commissions, Democrats and Republicans from the House and Senate on them. And I testified before them and, was saying, people need national improvement Medicare for all. This will actually save money, blah, blah, blah. But they were trying to come out with a privatization. And it was through a lot of efforts by people to push back and expose what they were doing that they ended up not doing it. They ended up kind of just fading away and not making any kinds of recommendations. That, to me, I don't think people have had that experience yet. But I saw it up close and personal, that it was a bipartisan effort to undermine our social safety net, which people would think that's crazy because that was the Democrats' legacy, early in the 20th century. But we've gone so far in this kind of neoliberal system that we have that we're seeing both parties participate in that.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to early 1990s, even with the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton's administration, shaving all sorts of money from the Medicare budget, as well as then putting age restrictions on how long people could gain or how long they could access social safety nets. And those two big moves right there, especially the age cap, I think Dr. Flowers has had a huge lasting impact on how people are given support in this country, which is incredibly terrifying. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time there with you, Dr. Margaret Flowers. Where can more people find your work in line and join Popular Resistance?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, please do go to popularresistance.org. You can sign up for our daily digest. It's free, and you'll get every morning the articles that we posted the day before. We also organize campaigns, so you'll get information about that as well. popularresistance.org.
As she mentioned there, it's free and for the public. Go out and support Popular Resistance. Thank you again, Dr. Flowers, for joining us. With that, we'll take a quick break before we come back with our weekly Trends with Benefits segment. You listen to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. You hear that sound? It is the sexiest segment on the network, Trends with Benefits. As always, you can reach us either through tweets, chats, or a phone call, 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. For some reason, I get tickled calling this the sexiest segment on the network. I love it. It's time. So BuzzFeed earlier today, and we debated on where to put the story, but I think the story fits here really well for Trends with Benefits, because this is definitely a trend. BuzzFeed reported that the Biden campaign has been passing around talking points to get his surrogates on the same page that Tara Reade, the woman that's accusing him of sexual assault, is basically lying. We've had Abrams on CNN going so far as to say New York Times basically exonerated her. And you have this woman who cried or teared up during the four Kavanaugh hearings, Gillibrand. Let's hear the clip of Gillibrand.
So when we say believe women, it's for this explicit intention of making sure there's space for all women to come forward, to speak their truth, to be heard. And in this allegation, that is what Tara Reade has done. She has come forward, she has spoken, and they've done an investigation in several outlets. Those investigations, Vice President Biden has called for himself. Vice President Biden has vehemently denied these allegations, and I support Vice President Biden.
Yeah, that's great. She supports Vice President Biden. After months, I got to be honest, this is pretty sad, this is pretty desperate, and this is pretty deplorable. After months of Democrats refusing to comment and many months of the media overtly not covering the story, several back-to-back releases of corroborating evidence shamed mainstream media into finally covering the story. It started off as a trickle with electronic publications and independent media. Then last night, the Democratic Party's main press outfit, MSNBC, covered the story. Enter one Chris Hayes. Let's hear Chris Hayes' clip.
There have been moments, I think for many of us, all of us, when we have heard about accusations against someone that we find ourselves desperately wanting not to believe. Whether that is because we have some personal admiration for the individual or their work, or political admiration, someone on our quote unquote side. But part of the difficult lesson of the Me Too era is not that every accusation is true and everything should be believed on its face, but that you do have to fight yourself when you feel that impulse. You have to do that in order to take seriously what is being alleged and what the evidence is and to evaluate it. And that is the case with the accusation by a woman named Tara Reade against Joe Biden.
Now, what do you think the response was to Chris Hayes? What do you think the response was to Chris Hayes? Chris Hayes did his job. He gave the story. Again, you had all sorts of corroborating evidence that took place around the time that Reade came out with this particular case. Fire Chris Hayes. Hashtag fire Chris Hayes. Trending this morning, and the last I checked, it was still trending. You have one person saying, I often love what Chris Hayes has to say about issues, but this bro departure and his message is a deal breaker. Fire Chris Hayes. Boycott Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes and Ari Melbourne are Bernie bros. They're grieving Magic Grandpa's loss and have decided to help re-elect Trump. This is astonishing. I would never watch that trash fire show again. Fire Chris Hayes. Or at least make MSNBC vet some S before throwing another election. There are all sorts of these. These people have lost their mind in attacking Chris Hayes for doing his job. All of you are propagandists. All of you are propagandists. If you felt some kind of way for Ford and Kavanaugh, that particular hearing that took place a couple of years ago, but you believe Biden is totally innocent, I am going to call you a lying dog-face pony soldier. That's what I'm going to call you. I don't believe for a moment that you don't see the emancipatory hypocrisy of this pathetically absurd, ignoble position. We hate Trump. And because we hate Trump, we're not just willing to settle for Joe Biden, we're willing to attack a potential rape victim and attack people supporting that potential victim. You're so crap yourself petrified that you're desperate for a cognitively challenged man to beat Trump. This emergency is apparently too important for ethics, too important for integrity, too important for standards. You all should be ashamed of yourselves. You all should be absolutely ashamed of yourselves. And just so we're clear, it wasn't Christian Gillibrand. It was actually Senator Kirsten
Gillibrand.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying it wrong. Kirsten Gillibrand. I'm sorry. Gillibrand, not Kristen.
People need to go back and watch these tapes of Kirsten Gillibrand and Kamala Harris as well, and how these two were so apoplectic around the Kavanaugh stuff. Yeah. Kirsten Gillibrand is on interviews like tearing up about it and how absurd it is that no one's listening. I mean, it's a mess right now. I don't know what Gillibrand's thinking. I don't know what Abrams is thinking. Stacey Abrams has basically... The people that I follow online who are big Abrams fans there in Georgia have said, I got to cut ties with her. I'm out.
Oh, and by the way, just to interrupt real quick, I didn't add this part. Abrams, when she came out with her case, Abrams came out and made the argument that New York Times basically corroborated Joe Biden, that basically New York Times put down this story. New York Times found this to be so onerous that New York Times reporter Lisa Lear tweeted out a response. Biden's campaign talking points inaccurately suggest that a New York Times investigation found that Tara Reade's allegation did not happen. Our investigation made no such conclusions. This is so sad.
Yeah. No, and the New York Times definitely did plenty of favors for him, too, but it was a bridge too far. I don't know if they were listening to our show yesterday when we pointed out the fact that the New York Times is not a credible news source for when it comes to investigating sexual allegations. So they look into some bro journalists, go out there, they interview some people, and they are the definitive voice. I don't remember the New York Times finding anything on Kavanaugh, but yet we went ahead with committee hearings. I mean, where's Jeff Flake when we need him, Jamal, to bring some truth to the moment?
That's right. I mean, I like, it is a whiplash, right? I remember I was around during the Kavanaugh hearings. And as I was around during the Kavanaugh hearings,
you say that like it was in like the 1940s. It was like, yeah, a year and a half ago.
Right? I mean, because of the way they're acting. Like, it's like just an immediate flip. We completely believe Kavanaugh did it. We don't believe Joe Biden did it. What? How are you coming to that weird conclusion? I can see if you say, I don't believe either one, or I believe both. I don't know how you believe one and not the other. That's a bizarre situation.
So what does he do, Joe? I mean, if you have to advise or Joe Biden, you can advise Bernie Sanders to advise Joe Biden, however you want to do it. But what do you say to Joe Biden? Because there's no way he can't keep going without addressing this. There's going to be too many people. So you take it head on, and what do you say? You deny it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if Joe Biden's argument up to this point was it didn't happen, then how can you deviate from that? Like, I don't necessarily. I give Tara Reade the benefit of the doubt, but I don't know as a flat fact that it happened. And if my name is Joe Biden and I'm saying that this didn't happen, then I'm going to go out there and say, look, this did not happen. I understand there might be corroborating evidence, but you better have an explanation for why she's telling people this, or for that matter, why she was fired from her position. Like, because under Joe Biden's idea, she's making this out of whole cloth. Is it possible? Yes. But there's a lot of weird stuff that went on at the time that shown that something was going on around her at the time where all of this was taking place. And so if your name is Joe Biden, I think you have to deal with it. I mean, people are going to either accept it or not. But pretending like this doesn't exist is going to eat you alive. I mean, when Donald Trump weaponizes this, when the Republican Party weaponizes this, you already have Chris Hayes on MSNBC playing this, that's not going to stop. Especially if Joe Biden continuously says, I didn't do it. And you know what's going to happen? Media is going to have a fiduciary responsibility that's going to supersede any notion of trying to protect Joe Biden. Just like when Elizabeth Warren was like, how are you going to pay for it, Warren? How are you going to pay for it? And the moment that she kept saying she's not going to tell, they kept asking her the question. The same thing will happen to Biden.
Yeah, we have one of our favorite callers on the line, DJ. DJ, thanks for hanging out with us here on Political Misfits.
Oh, thanks for having me.
What's up, man? What's on your mind?
Oh, I didn't know I could be here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just feel like that Chris Hayes come to Jesus moment, it's all for show.
You think
to be
so?
honest, the Washington Post article. The reason why is because Biden is done. I do not believe for a second that they're going to keep him. They're prepping to get rid of him.
I see.
But that the optics of that phone call are insane. Like that, the way anyone would perceive that, it's like, okay, you have a mother who made that phone call. According to the neighbor, that phone call was against Tara's wishes because she respected Biden. It came 20 years later. That is the only thing that's preventing her from having her name dragged through the mud. It's something that really catches people's attention because if I'm being honest, I did not believe that until I heard that call.
Really?
I didn't believe those allegations. I'm ashamed to admit it, yeah.
Well,
but
I'm curious. Why didn't you believe it until you heard that phone call?
Well, honestly, you got to factor in things like the Me Too movement, where you look at these politically motivated. They use these things. It's a weaponized tactic. To be honest, you look at the believe all women, regardless. You should listen to everyone, but to say that nuance is not a factor in any of these circumstances, that's bad. To just say nothing is 100%. Everything requires balance, and then just to say that it's just like we want this weapon that can be used at any point in time. And looking at those Kavanaugh proceedings, that was really, really shady. And then you're looking at this and you say, okay, well, she's not reporting this to the cops. She's reporting this to the news outlet.
Right.
That was something that I've heard many people say. It's like, well, what's the intent of a news outlet? To inform people. What's the intent, or what's the purpose of going to the authorities? Even if the statute of limitation isn't a factor, you create a record of a particular behavior. So the actions communicated a certain intent behind what she was doing. Then you start looking at a lot of the things that the people that she was connected to. You do put those things into consideration. The brother, the unusual situation with the brother, where he's like, "Oh yeah, come on, sis. If someone told me my sister was assaulted, someone's got to leave this earth." I don't want to. I don't know if it's appropriate to say that, but that's the truth, you know. So you hear that and you're like, that doesn't really make sense to me.
Dude, thank you for calling in, man. I appreciate your call, DJ. So Bob, what do you think about that? I agree with that, right? Basically, like I said, I try to take the position that I don't agree or disagree. It's kind of like I give both of them their due, dance between the raindrops, which is kind of understanding that as a flat fact, I don't know. And so because as a flat fact, I don't know, I kind of give both the benefit of the doubt. But there are times where I lean towards one way or the other. What do you think about what he just said? That basically, like, look, I took it as maybe she wasn't telling the truth until I heard her mom's cooperation, because her mom's cooperation was so stirring. The fact that, this is coming like 20 years or 30 years in the past, where she's calling it the Larry King, trying to make this, like, reaching out to try to find something to do with her daughter because she can't necessarily do anything on her own. I agree with him. The optics on that are pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think for everyone, it kind of just adds up, and different people have different moments where they change their opinion on things. And at this point, there's so much that's out there. I mean, obviously, these papers of Joe Biden's Senate time in the Senate, I would still love to see those. So there's more information, and that just plays worse into Joe Biden's hand. Like, there's more things that are going to come out. There's going to be more pressure to release those papers. It's in a weird situation, though, because Tara Reade did go to the Washington Police, the Metropolitan Police Department. I could have told her earlier that they're useless, but this investigation is not going to happen by the police. It's beyond a statute of limitations. Yeah. And so there is no actual legal recourse she can take that I'm aware of. And so it does need to go into the hands of the media and the public discourse. So it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out, and when Joe Biden does comment, if he's able to stay awake while he makes those comments, what he's able to say. But then you even have, was it Rose McGowan, who is now, I don't care about these white women crying about the Me Too movement. Obviously, these people are victims as well. They should care, but they've propped up the Democratic Party. They've been mindful players within the system and propping it up. But other people, big name celebrities, there's schisms now forming within the second wave of the Me Too, the celebritization of the Me Too movement. And that is also really damning for other victims that are out there. I mean, they're willing to back Joe Biden at the expense of other victims coming forward, because when Kirsten Gillibrand, who's been a champion for sexual abuse within the military, and making sure that has been called out and questioned, and I've really appreciated her on doing that, but now all of a sudden she's siding with Joe Biden without all the information coming forward. You have somebody like Stacey Abrams, who is a champion for many black women across the country and is in a very important political figure. She's saying, I trust Joe Biden as well. These women are doing irreparable damage to the long-term effort of the Me Too movement and for victims to come forward, because now all of a sudden these high-profile women who people thought were on their side and there was some momentum to be gained there are now coming out for Joe Biden ahead of all of the information even being on the table. That, for me, Jamal, is going to set a really bad precedent.
Oh, that's a horrible precedent. I mean, not just a horrible precedent, it's also a contradiction in terms, right? Joe Biden is trying to get a woman to be his vice president. As getting a woman to be his vice president, the entire point is to add, this notion that the person who's coming behind me is going to be a female. We need to have a woman in this particular spot. It's her turn, et cetera, et cetera. Fine. I would prefer to get somebody based on policy, but whatever floats your boat.
Jamal, let's slide in one last caller here before we have to turn to a break. Crazy Karen, she is called. That's not my name for her, but Crazy Karen, welcome to Political Misfits.
Hi, I just walked in on this conversation, but I heard Jamal on Fault Lines yesterday. Are you aware there's another woman accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault?
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. I did see that.
Did see it. Do you find that credible?
Well, I don't know enough about that one. I mean, honestly,
thank you for your call, Karen. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that one. I mean, Bob, do you know anything about that particular assault?
No, that's not I had not heard about that, so we'll look into that and report on that tomorrow.
Yeah, that's fine. I got to be honest. For somebody like Warren, who basically said, I believe women. I mean, like so definitively about it, where she's going to, on the debate stage, she's talking to Chris Matthews. She even goes after Bloomberg about the NDAs. Well, isn't it not the same thing? I mean, whether it's an NDA or whether you have a university that's holding records that you don't disclose, isn't that the same? I mean, basically, there's information that's out there that may either corroborate or undermine a person's story. She wants the information out. We definitely want the information out because we want to know the reality of it. And Biden, not so much. Democrats, not so much.
I was told there was going to be an April debate with the DNC. Can we get Warren back in there with Biden and pressure him like she did to Bloomberg? Maybe it's not too late tomorrow.
There is no way. Sadly, she's trying to be VP. That's kind of my point. That's the contradiction, right? I believe women, but yeah, I'm trying to be VP now, so not this woman.
No, not this woman. Well, Jamar, with that is all the time we have for our weekly Trends with Benefits segment. I think that trend is going to continue well into the future. We'll continue to cover it here on Political Misfits. We do need to take one last break before we close things out. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We got 8 minutes left here on Political Misfits. After us, we have By Any Means Necessary with Sean Blackman and Jacqueline Luckman. That will be from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, followed by Loud and Clear with John Kiriakou and Brian Becker. And then the Critical Hour at 6 p.m., Dr. Leon Wilmer. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. Jamarl, a few minutes left here. Where do you want to go? McConnell, Brian Williams, or condoms?
Brian Williams. All
right, we'll go to
Brian Williams. Brian
Williams. We know what you think about him already. You know who else doesn't like Brian Williams? That would be Donald Trump. Donald Trump was up late into the evening last night on a tweet storm, to say the least. Here's some of the tweets directed here at Brian Williams. Whatever happened was triggering, to say the least. Trump tweets out, quote, "I must admit that Lion Brian Williams is, while dumber than hell, quite a bit smarter than fake news at CNN anchorman Don Lemon." He also tweeted, "Lion Brian Williams of MSDNC, a Comcast scan company." See what he did there. Quite a few there. Creative guy there late into the evening. Donald Trump, good for you. Too bad you can't come up with creative or innovative ways to end the pandemic that we're facing, but you are able to tweet out witty remarks there on Twitter. He goes on to say, Brian Williams wouldn't know the truth if it was nailed to his wooden forehead. Remember when he lied about his bravery in a helicopter? Totally made up the story. He's a true dummy who was thrown off network news like a dog. Stay tuned. And finally, the last tweet here, just told that fake news at CNN is falsely reporting that I was recently shouting at my campaign manager over made up nonsense. Actually, he is doing a great job. I never shouted at him and have no intention to do so, just fake news. Tomorrow, it seems like Donald Trump has plenty of time to tweet, but not actually do his job.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. If Trump loses, man, we're going to miss a lot of entertainment in that White House. I mean, he goes unrestrained. Like, there isn't like a shadow of maybe I should hold back. He goes all in. Look, I don't particularly like Brian Williams either, so fair enough. And Brian Williams has a tendency to lie like nobody's business. There was one time where Bernie Sanders had that thing called My Bernie Story. I don't know if you remember this. It was hashtag My Bernie Story. And Brian Williams came on the show and said, here's my Bernie story. And he calls this random guy named Anonymous Horse Whisperer or something. And the guy just attacks Sanders. It's like, yeah, well, I remember Bernie wouldn't get out the race and Hillary Clinton lost. That's my Bernie story. Now, Brian Williams is doing this out of the blue. He's taking this moment just to screw with Sanders. I don't particularly like Brian Williams. Brian Williams is on that MSDNC. I don't think that's unfair for Donald Trump to say because they, for the most part, deal with this constantly, either attacking Trump, Sanders, or whatever else that's against the Democratic Party. I am even shocked that Hayes covered the story, to be honest.
I just got so excited to talk about Brian Williams that I mispronounced. I spoke and inverted our great Critical Hour host named Wilmer Leon. That's what you get, Dr. Leon, for having two first names there, confusing us here as the confusion of why Donald Trump is tweeting late into the evening and not focusing on his job. Jamal, what did you make of that story, though? You saw that as well, that it was reports that Donald Trump was yelling at his people. I don't know. People yell. Donald Trump obviously yells at people. I don't think it's much of a story, but it seems like if anything taught us about 2016 is that the polls are going to most likely show Joe Biden ahead in a lot of these states, just like Hillary Clinton was shown ahead. But at the end of the day, either people are lying to these pollsters because they don't actually want to admit out loud that Donald Trump is their pick, or the polls just don't know how to accurately capture what's happening in the United States.
It's funny. It might be a little bit of both, right? Because if you think back to Hillary's loss, Hillary Clinton was winning in all of the swing states. I mean, some of those states by 10 points, 12 points, obscene numbers. And then when the actual number come out, Trump wins in all of those states. So I don't necessarily know if they're lying or if it's one of those things that's just kind of hard to interpret. From the other standpoint, in regards to him yelling at his campaign manager, I assumed it was true. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's beyond the pale for Donald Trump to yell. We can see what he does on Twitter. I don't know why he wouldn't do that as president of the United States to people he consider his subordinates. So that wouldn't shock me at all. I think the issue for Trump and the reason why he's bringing that up is because the reason that he was yelling at his campaign manager, that he was losing, that basically every time he was going out there and doing these press briefings, he was embarrassing himself. And so if your name is Donald Trump, you read that story, well, you might be like, no, that never happened. That never happened. Because you don't want to deal with the insecurity of losing. So I'm not shocked that Trump will lie about it, nor am I shocked that he would do it. It's kind of that both ways. But like you said, I suppose it's neither here nor there because of polling. If it's anything like 2016, he was losing up until the last minute.
Yeah, Jamal, we have two other stories there. Let me first slide in this condom story. Basically, the ripple effect of COVID-19 is hitting condom sales. They're dropping. They've wilted. Sales have gone absolutely soft, according to the maker of Durex condoms. Unfortunately, people have significantly less sex as they were before because of strict physical distancing rules. Shout out to Michelle Whitty for her wittiness with that write-up. The CEO of Durex, CEO of the company that produces the condom said, what you see is this virus is having a toll on the number of intimate occasions in the UK. There should only be interplay, Jamal, between economies, not people during COVID-19.
That's funny, right? I suppose if you're thinking of, what's that site called? It's not Tinder. If you're thinking of Tinder, if you're thinking of these dating sites, all of those things are off. Imagine how much,
well, they're not
how many condom
off.
sales from Tinder.
Tinder's, it's still on. They'll tell you during it and stuff, basically maintain social distancing. I promise you people are still going out and hooking up. There is no virus that's going to stop people from hooking up. The last story there, we'll cover it more tomorrow on International Workers' Day, on May Day. But basically, Mitch McConnell saying that the Republicans and the government will not pass any bills providing more assistance to state and local governments if it doesn't include those legal protections. Basically, what they're going to tell states is that we're not going to back you up. And what those states are then going to say is those businesses in their states must go back to work. They're going to force people to go back to work because they don't want to pay unemployment benefits. Right. They don't want to pay small businesses to help them recuperate. So basically what you're seeing is the federal government is going to force people to go back to work, and the reopening of the economy way before we are ready to do so. And the impact on healthcare workers is going to be more profound than we may have already seen. It's quite alarming, to say the least. Jamal, we are out of time here on Political Misfits for Thursday, April 30th. A big thank you to our guests today, Dr. Margaret Flowers and Paul Dobson. Big thank you, as always, to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team for keeping us on the air. Shout out to our producer, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
All right, guys. I appreciate you guys showing up today. Oh, good. The volume stayed. You are probably going to see me later on this evening. So I'm just going to say like, share, and subscribe. Merced Callie, hey, Brave Browser and DuckDuckGo are great. Oh, I'm pretty sure they are. I think his point is it's hard to get people to do something until you have a lot of other people to do it. It's like if one person just doesn't pay their rent. It's not entirely a rent strike. I guess it is a rent strike of one, but that person is effectively going to get evicted. If you have 1 million people do it, you have something else. So that's all he meant. He wasn't trying to go after him. Constitution Journal. I think Biden did make contact with these women. I do too. I believe that it may be because of his brain injury. He just can't remember it. I am writing an article showing all of the men he kisses on and hugs in creepy ways. Yeah, I'm not shocked by this. I mean, what's the woman who, Rosa Flores? I mean, she came out, said Biden touched me inappropriately. And Biden eventually was like, yeah, I did touch women appropriately. Look, if Biden come out and says, I didn't rape her, however, I did, push up on her. But you need to explain this. And you can't just pretend like it didn't happen. Or at the very least, you can't just pretend that nobody's talking about it, because that is going to eat you alive. And by the way, not just eat you alive in the sense that, no, you're not going to get a Republican voter vote for you. But what you may do is suppress the vote from a lot of people who say, yeah, I can't vote for that. Like, that's their standard. Like, imagine for the moment you're making an argument that, no, you got to vote for this rapist. That doesn't, how does that sit well with you in making that case? It doesn't sit well with me at all. Standards. Got to have standards. Like, share, subscribe. Guys, contribute appreciation is probably going to be tomorrow. And of course, we're going to have one on Sunday. I wasn't feeling well over the weekend, so like, share, subscribe.